In the bustling city of Chicago, where concrete seemed to swallow any trace of nature, an unusual story began to unfold in the streets of Lincoln Park. Among the tall buildings and busy shops, a golden-haired stray dog with expressive eyes caught the attention of passers-by. It wasn't his appearance that intrigued them, but rather his peculiar behavior. Every day, precisely at 10 a.m., the dog would appear at the corner of Clark Street, carrying a bright green leaf in his mouth. With determined steps, he would walk down the street, stopping in front of each store. He would sit patiently, looking at the shopkeepers with pleading eyes, and offer the leaf as if it were a form of currency. Michael Thompson, owner of a small traditional grocery store, had been observing this canine ritual for weeks. At first, he found the situation amusing, but as the days passed, curiosity began to consume his thoughts. What does this dog want? He wondered while arranging the shelves in his store. On a particularly busy morning, the dog arrived at Michael's grocery store. As usual, he sat down, the green leaf firmly held between his teeth. Michael was busy attending to an elderly customer, Mrs. Harrison, who was doing her weekly shopping. "Michael, dear, look at that little dog," exclaimed Mrs. Harrison, pointing to the animal. "He seems so determined." "I've been seeing him doing this for quite some time." Michael nodded, finally decided to understand the mystery. "Indeed, Mrs. Harrison, I think it's time we find out what he wants." Excusing himself to his customer, Michael approached the door. The dog, upon seeing him, stood up, wagging his tail hopefully. Michael crouched down, extending his hand slowly so as not to frighten the animal. "Hey there, buddy. What do you have there?" he asked softly. The dog dropped the leaf at Michael's feet, looking at him expectantly. Michael picked up the leaf, examining it carefully. It was a common tree leaf, nothing special at first glance. At that moment, a young student passing by stopped to observe the scene. "Hey, sir," he called out, "I know what that dog is doing." Michael and Mrs. Harrison looked curiously at the young man, who introduced himself as Jack. "I've been watching this dog for a while. He goes from store to store trying to trade that leaf for food. It's like he's created his own currency, you know." The revelation left Michael and Mrs. Harrison speechless. The idea of a stray dog developing such a strategy was both touching and surprising. "But why a leaf?" asked Mrs. Harrison, intrigued. Jack shrugged. "Who knows? Maybe it's the only thing he can find consistently. The important thing is that he's trying, isn't it?" Michael felt his heart tighten. He looked at the dog, who continued sitting patiently, his eyes full of hope. Without hesitation, he went into the store and returned with a bowl of fresh water and a handful of kibble he kept for the neighborhood cats. "Here you go, buddy," said Michael, placing the food and water on the ground. "Your leaf was worth it today." The dog wagged his tail frantically, attacking the food with voracity. It was evident that it had been a while since his last decent meal. While the dog ate, Michael, Mrs. Harrison, and Jack talked about the situation of stray animals in the city. The story of the leaf dog, as they began to call him, deeply touched each of them. "You know what?" said Michael, an idea forming in his mind. "From today on, I'm going to leave some food and water for this brave fellow every day. He deserves it, don't you think?" Mrs. Harrison and Jack enthusiastically agreed. Michael's gesture was small, but significant. It was a beginning, a spark of compassion amid the coldness of the big city. In the days that followed, the leaf dog continued his routine, but now had a fixed stopping point, Michael's grocery store. Whenever he arrived, he found a bowl of fresh water and some kibble waiting for him. Michael observed with satisfaction how the animal seemed healthier each day. The news about the leaf dog and Michael's kindness began to spread throughout the neighborhood. Other shopkeepers, inspired by Michael's attitude, also started leaving food and water for the stray animals. Gradually, a small revolution of compassion was forming in Lincoln Park, but the story of the leaf dog was far from over. One night, as Michael was closing the store, he noticed something different. The dog was there, but he wasn't carrying his usual leaf. Instead, he was barking insistently, running back and forth in front of the store. "What's wrong, buddy?" asked Michael, concerned about the animal's unusual behavior. The dog barked once more and started running down the street, stopping to look back, as if wanting Michael to follow him. Intrigued and a bit apprehensive, Michael decided to follow the animal. As they walked through the increasingly dark streets of the neighborhood, Michael wondered where they were going and what the dog wanted to show him. Little did he know that he was about to discover a secret that would change not only his life, but that of the entire Lincoln Park neighborhood. Michael followed the leaf dog through the winding streets of Lincoln Park, his heart racing with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. The streetlights cast long shadows on the asphalt, creating an almost surreal environment. The dog seemed to know exactly where he was going, leading Michael through alleys and passages he didn't even know existed in his own neighborhood. After about 20 minutes of walking, they arrived at a more remote area where residential buildings gave way to warehouses and small factories. The dog stopped in front of an old, apparently abandoned warehouse, barking insistently at the rusty door. Michael hesitated. "Is this it, buddy?" "What's in there?" In response, the dog scratched at the door, whimpering softly. Michael, gathering courage, approached and pushed the door, which opened with a frightening creak. The interior of the warehouse was dark and dusty. Michael used his phone's flashlight to illuminate the environment, following the dog, who was now trotting determinedly to a corner of the place. That's when Michael heard it, small barks and whimpers coming from behind some old boxes. As he approached, the flashlight revealed a scene that made his heart ache. A litter of 5 puppies nestled between old blankets and pieces of cardboard. They were thin and dirty, but alive and excited by the presence of the leaf dog, who was now lovingly licking each one of them. "My God," whispered Michael, finally understanding. "You're a father. Or mother?" Upon closer examination, Michael realized that the leaf dog was, in fact, a female. She looked at him with pleading eyes, as if begging for help. Without thinking twice, Michael took off his jacket and began gathering the puppies. "Don't worry, girl. We're getting you all out of here." With his arms full of puppies and the dog following closely, Michael made his way back to his grocery store. The night was well advanced when they finally arrived, and the streets were practically deserted. Michael improvised a cozy corner in the back of the store, using old boxes and blankets. He put out fresh water and some softened kibble for the mother and puppies. Exhausted but with a full heart, he sat on the store floor, watching the small canine family settle in. "And now," he asked himself aloud, "what am I going to do with you all?" The next morning, news about the rescued dogs spread quickly through the neighborhood. Mrs. Harrison was the first to appear at the grocery store, bringing milk and extra blankets. "Michael, dear, what a wonderful thing you've done," she exclaimed, enchanted with the puppies. Soon after, Jack arrived, the student who had explained the leaf dog's behavior. "Man, this is incredible. Can I take some pictures to post on social media? Maybe we can get help to care for them." Jack's idea lit up a bulb in Michael's mind. "You know what? I think we can do more than that. How about organizing an adoption event here at the store?" Mrs. Harrison clapped her hands, enthusiastic. "What a great idea, Michael. I can help prepare some snacks for the people who come. And I can create a Facebook event and spread the word at college," offered Jack. Thus, in the days that followed, Michael's small grocery store transformed into the center of a true revolution of solidarity in Lincoln Park. Neighbors appeared bringing food, toys, and even clothes for the puppies. Local veterinarians offered to do free checkups on the dogs. Among the visitors was Sarah Thompson, Michael's niece, whom he hadn't seen in years. Sarah, a newly graduated veterinarian, had learned about the rescue through social media. "Uncle Mike," she exclaimed upon entering the store, "I can't believe you did all this." Michael hugged his niece, happy to see her. "Sarah, what a nice surprise. Did you come to see the puppies?" Sarah smiled, her eyes shining with emotion. "I came to help. I just graduated as a vet and would love to take care of these little ones." Sarah's offer was received with joy, not only by Michael but by everyone involved in caring for the dogs. Her expertise would be fundamental in ensuring the animals' health and well-being. While they prepared for the adoption event, Michael couldn't help but think about how drastically his life had changed in just a few days. From a simple shopkeeper, he had become the center of a network of solidarity that expanded each day. The day of the event arrived and Clark Street was unrecognizable. Colorful banners announced the adoption fair. Booths were set up in front of shops offering food, toys, and information about pet care. Michael's grocery store, the epicenter of it all, was decorated with balloons and posters. The 5 puppies, now healthy and playful, were the stars of the show. Entire families crowded to see them, many already applying to adopt them. In the midst of the commotion, Michael noticed the leaf dog sitting calmly, observing everything with what seemed to be a look of satisfaction. He crouched down beside her, stroking her ears. "Look at what you started, girl," he said softly. "Who would have thought that a simple leaf could change so many lives?" At that moment, Michael had an epiphany. This wasn't the end of a journey, but the beginning of something much bigger. Lincoln Park was uniting in a way he had never seen before, all because of a dog and her leaf. As he observed the scene before him, people laughing, children playing with the puppies, neighbors talking animatedly, Michael felt a wave of emotion wash over him. Something was being born here, something that would go far beyond the adoption of a few stray dogs. But little did Michael know that the events of that day would be just the prelude to a series of events that would shake not only Lincoln Park, but the entire city of Chicago. The leaf dog had planted a seed of change, and it was only beginning to sprout. The success of the adoption event at Michael Thompson's grocery store reverberated far beyond the borders of Lincoln Park. In the weeks that followed, the story of the leaf dog and her puppies went viral on social media, attracting the attention of journalists, activists, and local politicians. Sarah, Michael's niece, became a central figure in this growing movement. Her passion for animal welfare, combined with her technical knowledge as a veterinarian, transformed her into a natural spokesperson for the newly formed Friends of Lincoln Park Animals Association. On a sunny afternoon, Sarah was at the grocery store, discussing next steps with Michael, when an elegant and well-dressed figure entered the store. It was Elizabeth Carter, a councilwoman known for her work on social causes. "Good afternoon," Elizabeth greeted, looking around with interest. "This is the famous site of the leaf miracle, isn't it?" Michael and Sarah exchanged glances, surprised by the unexpected visit. "Yes, it is," Michael responded, extending his hand. "I'm Michael Thompson, the owner of the grocery store." Elizabeth smiled, shaking Michael's hand. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Mr. Thompson. What you've done here is truly inspiring. I came personally to see if there's anything the City Council can do to support this initiative." Elizabeth's offer opened up a world of possibilities. In the hours that followed, she, Michael, and Sarah discussed ambitious ideas, from creating a municipal animal shelter to free spaying and neutering programs and education about responsible pet ownership in neighborhood schools. Meanwhile, outside the grocery store, life went on. The leaf dog, now called Hope by the locals, walked calmly along the sidewalk, receiving pets and treats from passers-by. She had become a local celebrity, symbolizing the transformation the neighborhood was undergoing. However, not everyone viewed the changes happening with a positive eye. Robert Finch, a local businessman and owner of several properties in the area, observed the movement at Michael's grocery store with a scowl. "This is going to devalue my properties," he grumbled to his assistant Alex. "A bunch of stray dogs running around. We need to do something about this." Alex, a young recent graduate in business administration, seemed uncomfortable. "But boss, people seem to be enjoying it. Maybe we could see this as an opportunity to improve the neighborhood's image." Robert shot a withering look at Alex. "Opportunity? The only opportunity I see is for problems. I want you to find out everything you can about this Michael Thompson and this association they're forming. There must be some irregularity there." While Robert plotted behind the scenes, the Friends of Lincoln Park Animals Association gained more and more strength. Jack, the student who had helped in the beginning, now led a team of volunteers who patrolled the neighborhood streets, identifying animals at risk and providing care. One of these patrols led to a shocking discovery. In a vacant lot on the outskirts of the neighborhood, volunteers found dozens of abandoned dogs and cats, many of them sick and malnourished. The news spread quickly, and soon Michael's grocery store became the center of operations for a large-scale rescue effort. Volunteer veterinarians, led by Sarah, set up a makeshift clinic in the back of the store. Residents appeared at all hours, bringing food, blankets, and offering to adopt or temporarily foster the animals. Amid the organized chaos, Michael found himself overwhelmed by the magnitude of what had begun. He watched in amazement as his small grocery store transformed into the epicenter of a true revolution of compassion. "Uncle Mike," Sarah called, approaching with a puppy in her arms. We need more space. We can't continue using the grocery store as an improvised shelter. Michael nodded, thoughtful. You're right. But where are we going to find a place big enough to house all these animals? At that moment, Jack rushed into the store, out of breath with excitement. Guys, you won't believe it. Remember that abandoned warehouse where we found Hope's puppies? Well, I did some research and found out it belongs to the city. It's been abandoned for years. Michael's eyes lit up. The warehouse, of course. If we could get permission to use it. I know exactly who can help us with that, Sarah interrupted, reaching for her phone. I'm going to call Councilwoman Carter. If she really wants to support our cause, this is the perfect chance. While Sarah made the call, Michael stepped out to the front of the store, needing a moment to breathe and process everything that was happening. Outside, he found Hope, the leaf dog, sitting calmly on the sidewalk, as if standing guard. Michael crouched down beside her, stroking her golden fur. Look at what you started, girl, he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. Who would have thought that a simple leaf could change so many lives? Hope looked at him, her brown eyes full of a wisdom that Michael couldn't fully comprehend. At that moment, he had the strange sensation that this animal understood much more than it appeared. Suddenly, a shout of joy came from inside the store. Sarah ran out, hugging Michael tightly. Uncle, Councilwoman Carter loved the idea. She's going to propose a bill to the city council to turn the warehouse into a municipal animal shelter. The news was received with applause and cheers from the volunteers and residents who were nearby. It was a significant victory, a giant step towards a better future for Lincoln Park's stray animals. As the celebration spread down the street, no one noticed a dark car parked across the road. In the driver's seat, Robert Finch observed the scene with a grim expression. So they want to use the warehouse, he muttered to himself. Interesting. Very interesting. With a smile that didn't reach his eyes, Robert started the car and drove off, his mind already scheming plans to prevent the shelter project from materializing. He wouldn't allow a bunch of well-meaning adventurers to ruin his plans for the neighborhood. But for now, at Michael's grocery store, the mood was one of pure joy and hope. A new era was beginning for Lincoln Park, an era of compassion and care for the most vulnerable. And all this thanks to a simple act of kindness and a dog with a leaf in its mouth. As night fell over Chicago, the lights of Michael's grocery store shone like a beacon of hope, promising a brighter future, not just for the stray animals, but for the entire community. The leaf revolution was just beginning. The weeks following Councilwoman Carter's proposal were filled with intense activity in Lincoln Park. News about the possible municipal animal shelter in the old abandoned warehouse spread like wildfire, mobilizing the community even more. Michael Thompson, now recognized as the heart of the initiative, could barely keep up with his responsibilities. Between managing the grocery store, coordinating volunteers, and participating in endless meetings with city representatives, he found himself exhausted but deeply fulfilled. On a particularly busy afternoon, while Michael was organizing food donations in the back of the store, he was surprised by a familiar voice. "Hey, Uncle Mike, need a hand?" It was Emily, his 16-year-old niece, daughter of his younger brother. Michael smiled, genuinely happy to see her. "Emily, what a nice surprise. Of course I need help. Come here." As they worked together, Emily told her uncle that she was doing a school project on community activism and wanted to use the story of the leaf dog as the central theme. "Uncle, it's amazing what you've started here," she said, her eyes shining with admiration. "You're practically a local hero now." Michael blushed, uncomfortable with the praise. "It's nothing, Emily. I just did what any kind-hearted person would do." At that moment, Sarah rushed into the grocery store, her face tense with concern. "Uncle Mike, we have a problem," she said, barely noticing Emily's presence. "I just found out there's a group organizing against the shelter project. They're going to hold a protest in front of City Hall tomorrow." The news fell like a bomb. Michael felt the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. But why? Who would be against helping abandoned animals? Sarah sighed, running her hand through her hair in a gesture of frustration. Apparently, some local businessmen think the shelter will devalue the area. They're spreading rumors about noise, dirt, and even possible diseases. Emily, who had been listening attentively, had an idea. What if we held our own demonstration? We could use social media to mobilize people. Michael and Sarah looked at each other, surprised by the young girl's suggestion. "You know, that's not a bad idea," said Sarah, already reaching for her phone. "I'm going to call Jack. He's great with this internet stuff." While Sarah made the call, Michael noticed Hope, the leaf dog, sitting near the store's door, as if listening to the conversation. Her intelligent eyes seemed to convey a message of calm and determination. "Don't worry, girl," Michael murmured. "We're not giving up now." The next day, Chicago City Hall became the stage for a surprising confrontation. On one side, a group of businessmen and residents opposed to the project, led by none other than Robert Finch. On the other, a colorful and noisy crowd of shelter supporters, many of them accompanied by their pets. Michael, Sarah, and Emily were at the center of the action, distributing flyers and talking to people. Hope, the leaf dog, attracted special attention, with many wanting to take photos with the local canine celebrity. Councilwoman Carter arrived shortly after, visibly moved by the mobilization. "This is incredible," she exclaimed, approaching Michael. "I've never seen so many people gathered for an animal cause in the city." As the council session unfolded inside the building, the tension outside was palpable. At one point, Robert Finch approached Michael, a fake smile on his lips. Well, if it isn't the famous hero of the strays," he said, his voice laden with sarcasm. "Enjoy your fame while you can, Thompson. This little project of yours won't last long." Before Michael could respond, Emily stepped between them, facing Finch with determination. "You're wrong, sir," she said, her voice firm despite her obvious nervousness. "What my uncle started is much bigger than you can imagine. It's about compassion, community, and doing the right thing." Finch seemed momentarily disconcerted by the teenager's intervention, but quickly regained his composure. With a final look of disdain, he moved away towards his group of supporters. The afternoon wore on and anxiety increased. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, Councilwoman Carter emerged from the building, her face a mask of professional neutrality. The crowd fell silent, anxiously awaiting the news. Carter picked up a megaphone and addressed those present. "Citizens of Chicago, after intense debate, I am pleased to announce that the project for the creation of the Lincoln Park Municipal Animal Shelter has been approved." The explosion of joy was immediate. Shouts, applause, and barks mingled in a symphony of celebration. Michael found himself enveloped in a group hug with Sarah, Emily, and several volunteers, tears of happiness streaming down his face. In the midst of the celebration, Michael noticed Robert Finch quickly moving away, his face contorted with anger. For a moment, their gazes met, and Michael felt a chill. Something told him that this battle was won, but the war was far from over. As the crowd began to disperse, Michael crouched down next to Hope, who was observing everything with her usual serenity. "We did it, girl," he said, stroking her ears. "But something tells me our journey is just beginning." That night, back at the grocery store, Michael, Sarah, and Emily celebrated their victory with an improvised dinner. The mood was joyful, but also determined. They knew that turning the approved project into reality would be an even greater challenge. "Uncle," said Emily while helping to wash the dishes, "I think I found my calling. I want to study veterinary medicine like Sarah. I want to make a difference like you." Michael felt his chest swell with pride. "I'm sure you will, sweetie. The world needs more people like you." Meanwhile, across town in a luxurious office, Robert Finch was making a phone call, his face a mask of cold determination. "Hello, Mr. Dawson. This is Robert Finch. Remember that matter we discussed? Well, I think it's time we put our plan into action. Lincoln Park needs a renovation." As night fell over Chicago, two opposing forces were preparing for a confrontation that promised to shake the foundations of Lincoln Park. On one side, the dream of a refuge for abandoned animals. On the other, an obscure project of urban renewal. And at the center of it all, a simple shopkeeper and a dog with a leaf in her mouth, unlikely symbols of a revolution of compassion that was just beginning. The dawn brought new energy to Lincoln Park. News of the approval of the municipal animal shelter project spread quickly, filling the streets with contagious optimism. However, for Michael Thompson and his team, the work was just beginning. Michael's grocery store, now affectionately nicknamed Hope's headquarters by residents, was buzzing with activity. Volunteers came and went, carrying supplies and documents. At the center of it all, Sarah coordinated efforts with the efficiency of a general on the battlefield. "Uncle Mike," she called, holding a stack of papers. "We need to start planning the warehouse renovation. The city will release the space in 2 weeks, and we have a lot of work ahead of us." Michael nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility. "You're right, Sarah, but how are we going to get labor and materials? Our resources are limited." At that moment, Jack entered the store, accompanied by a middle-aged man dressed in work clothes. "Guys, this is Mr. Oliver," Jack introduced, smiling. "He's a master builder and has offered to lead the warehouse renovation. And the best part, he's going to do it all voluntarily." Mr. Oliver extended his calloused hand to Michael. "It's a pleasure, Mr. Thompson. My daughter adopted one of Hope's puppies and it changed our lives. I want to give back somehow." Mr. Oliver's arrival was like a shot of adrenaline for the team. Soon he was hunched over the warehouse plans with Sarah and Michael, discussing the best ways to adapt the space for the animals. Meanwhile, across town, Robert Finch was meeting with a select group of businessmen and politicians in his luxurious office. "Gentlemen," he began, his deep voice echoing through the room, "this animal shelter project is just the beginning. If we don't act now, we'll soon have Lincoln Park transformed into a giant open-air kennel." Mr. Dawson, a lawyer known for his unorthodox methods, leaned forward. "And what do you suggest, Robert?" Finch smiled, a malicious glint in his eyes. "I have a plan to destabilize this project, but I'm going to need all of your cooperation." Back in Lincoln Park, the days passed in a whirlwind of activities. The community mobilized in a surprising way. Construction material stores offered discounts, local restaurants took turns feeding the volunteers, and even a renowned architect offered to redesign the interior of the warehouse for free. Emily, Michael's niece, became a key player in the team. Her skill with social media attracted the attention of local media, and soon the story of the shelter and the leaf dog was in the city's news. On a particularly busy afternoon, while Michael was organizing donations in the store, he was surprised by the arrival of Alex, Robert Finch's young assistant. "Mr. Thompson," said Alex, visibly nervous, "can I talk to you in private?" Intrigued, Michael took Alex to the back of the store. The young man seemed to be fighting an internal battle before finally speaking. "Mr. Thompson, I've come to warn you. Mr. Finch, he's planning something to sabotage the shelter project. I don't know exactly what, but I overheard conversations. It's something big and it's going to happen soon." Michael felt a chill down his spine. "Why are you telling me this, Alex?" The young man lowered his eyes. "Because what you're doing here is important, and I can't be on the wrong side of this story anymore." Before Michael could respond, they heard a commotion coming from the front of the store. When they got there, they were faced with a shocking scene. Hope, the leaf dog, was lying on the sidewalk, shaking and whimpering in pain. "What happened?" Michael shouted, running to the animal. An elderly lady with tears in her eyes replied, "It was horrible. A car sped by and almost ran over the poor thing. She jumped to the side, but I think she got hurt." Sarah, who had just arrived, was already on the phone. "I'm calling an emergency vet. Uncle Mike, we need to get her inside." Carefully, Michael and Jack carried Hope into the grocery store. The festive atmosphere from minutes ago had transformed into one of tension and concern. While waiting for the veterinarian, Michael couldn't help but think about Alex's words. Could this accident be part of Finch's plan? Looking at Hope, the living symbol of all they had achieved so far, Michael felt a renewed determination. "We won't give up," he murmured, gently stroking the dog's head. "No matter what happens, we'll fight to the end." The veterinarian arrived in record time, examining Hope carefully. After a few tense minutes, he turned to the anxious group. "She was very lucky. There are no fractures, just some bruises. With rest and care, she'll be fine in a few days." A collective sigh of relief echoed through the store. Sarah hugged her uncle, tears finally escaping. "This was a warning, Uncle Mike," she said, her voice choked. "We need to be more careful." Michael nodded, his mind working quickly. "You're right, and I think it's time we took some more proactive measures." That night, after closing the grocery store, Michael gathered a small group at his house. Sarah, Jack, Emily, and to everyone's surprise, Alex. "What happened to Hope today wasn't a coincidence," Michael began, his voice grave. "We have a powerful enemy, and he's willing to do anything to stop us." Alex, still visibly uncomfortable, added, Mr. Finch has connections all over the city. Politicians, businessmen, even some members of the police. A heavy silence fell over the group. It was Emily who finally broke it. "So what are we going to do? We can't give up now." Michael smiled, a determined glint in his eyes. "No, we can't, and we won't. But we need to be smart. Alex, are you willing to help us from the inside?" The young assistant hesitated for a moment, then nodded firmly. "I am. I'm tired of being on the wrong side of history." "Good," said Michael, "because I have a plan that will not only save the shelter, but expose Finch and his group once and for all." As the night progressed, the small group devised strategies, distributed tasks, and prepared for what promised to be the biggest battle of their lives. Outside, the stars shone over Lincoln Park, silent witnesses to a revolution that was about to shake the city's power structures. And in a corner of the room, lying in her improvised bed, Hope slept peacefully, oblivious to the whirlwind forming around her, but somehow central to it all. The sun had barely risen when Michael Thompson opened the doors of his grocery store. The last few days had been a whirlwind of emotions and events, but he knew that the real challenge was just beginning. With Hope recovering and the plan against Robert Finch underway, every move needed to be calculated with precision. Sarah arrived shortly after, carrying a stack of documents. "Good morning, Uncle. I spent the night reviewing the city contracts for the shelter. There's something strange here." Michael frowned, examining the papers his niece handed him. "What did you find?" "Look at this clause here," Sarah pointed out. "It says the land can be reclaimed by the city at any time, without prior notice if there's an urgent urban necessity. This wasn't in the original agreement." Sarah's discovery was worrying but not surprising. It was exactly the kind of maneuver they expected from Finch and his allies. Michael sighed, massaging his temples. "We need to talk to Councilwoman Carter. She needs to know about this." Meanwhile, across town, Alex, Finch's assistant, was participating in a tense meeting in his boss's office. Robert Finch seemed more confident than ever, a satisfied smile playing on his lips. "Gentlemen," Finch announced to those present, "our plan is progressing perfectly. Soon that land will be ours, and we can begin the largest real estate project this neighborhood has ever seen." Alex pretended to take notes, his heart racing. Every word from Finch was a piece of the puzzle he needed to transmit to Michael and his team. Back in Lincoln Park, Michael's grocery store had transformed into a true headquarters. Volunteers came and went, bringing news and taking instructions. Emily coordinated a team of young people on social media, keeping the community informed and engaged. Jack rushed in, holding his cell phone. "Guys, you need to see this. Hope's story has gone viral. People from all over the country are sharing and offering help." The news brought a moment of joy amid the tension. Michael smiled, looking at Hope, who was resting in her improvised bed. "See that, girl? You're famous." The moment of levity was interrupted by the arrival of Councilwoman Carter, her face a mask of concern. "Michael, Sarah, we need to talk. I just found out about something very serious." Gathered in the back of the grocery store, Carter revealed what she had discovered. Robert Finch isn't acting alone. He has the support of a group of international investors. They want to transform this entire area into a luxury complex. The news fell like a bomb. The challenge they faced was much bigger than they had initially imagined. But what about the people who live here? "The families, the small business owners?" Michael asked, his voice trembling with indignation. Carter shook her head sadly. "To them, we are just obstacles. But I won't allow them to destroy our community. I'm here to fight alongside you." At that moment, Michael's cell phone vibrated. It was a message from Alex. "Emergency meeting at Finch's office. Something big is about to happen." Michael looked at his team, determination shining in his eyes. "It's time to act. Sarah, you and Carter go to City Hall. We need to expose these irregularities. Jack, gather the press. Let's make this story public. Emily, keep social media buzzing. The more people know, the harder it will be for them to silence us." As the group dispersed to fulfill their tasks, Michael turned to Hope, who was watching him with her wise eyes. "And you, my friend, keep being our inspiration. Your courage brought us this far." The hours that followed were filled with intense activity. Sarah and Councilwoman Carter faced a tumultuous session at City Hall, exposing the illegal maneuvers behind the real estate project. Jack managed to attract the attention of several journalists, who now surrounded the grocery store seeking statements. On social media, the hashtag #RVSaveLincolnPark became a national trending topic. Meanwhile, in Finch's office, the tension was palpable. Alex observed his boss pacing back and forth, visibly disturbed by the news that was coming in. "How did they find out?" Finch vociferated. "Who's leaking our information?" Alex maintained a neutral expression, his heart racing. He knew he was walking a thin line, but with each moment he became more convinced that he was on the right side of history. Back in Lincoln Park, night was falling on a neighborhood in effervescence. Residents gathered in front of Michael's grocery store, bringing posters, food, and words of support. What had begun as a simple action to help stray animals had transformed into a movement of community resistance. Michael observed the crowd from the window of his store, a mixture of pride and apprehension in his chest. He knew the battle was far from over, but for the first time in weeks, he felt they had a real chance of winning. At that moment, his cell phone rang. It was an unknown number. When he answered, the voice on the other end made him freeze. "Mr. Thompson," Robert Finch's grave voice sounded, "I think we need to have a conversation. Face to face. What do you say to a meeting tomorrow at noon in Central Park?" Michael hesitated for a moment, then responded firmly, "I'll be there, Mr. Finch." As he hung up, Michael looked at Hope, who seemed to understand the gravity of the moment. "Tomorrow, girl," he murmured. "Tomorrow we'll know if all our effort was worth it." The night advanced, and while the city slept, two opposing forces prepared for a confrontation that promised to change the fate of Lincoln Park. On one side, greed and power. On the other, compassion and the strength of community. And at the center of it all, a simple shopkeeper and a dog with a leaf in her mouth, unlikely symbols of a revolution that was about to reach its climax. The dawn brought with it a palpable tension to Lincoln Park. The streets, normally full of life and movement, seemed to hold their breath in anticipation of the meeting scheduled for noon. Michael Thompson woke up early, his thoughts a turbulent mixture of determination and apprehension. As he went down to open the grocery store, he found Sarah, Jack, and Emily already waiting for him. The faces of his fellow fighters reflected the same mixture of emotions he felt. "Uncle," Sarah began, her voice firm despite the evident concern, "you don't have to go alone, we can be there with you." Michael smiled, touched by his team's loyalty. "I appreciate it, but this is something I need to do on my own. You've already done more than I could ask for." Meanwhile, in Robert Finch's luxurious apartment, the businessman prepared for the confrontation. His face, normally a mask of confidence, showed signs of stress. The last 24 hours had been a public relations nightmare, with the media and public opinion turning against him and his project. "Mr. Finch," called Alex, entering the office with a folder of documents, "everything is ready for the meeting." Finch nodded, his eyes fixed on the panoramic view of the city. "Alex, you've been a good assistant, loyal. I hope you continue to be so, no matter what happens today." Finch's words sent a chill down Alex's spine. The young assistant knew he was walking on thin ice, his double role as Michael's informant putting him in a dangerous position. As noon approached, a crowd began to form in Central Park. Residents, volunteers, and even journalists gathered, all eager to witness the meeting that could decide the future of the neighborhood. Michael arrived a few minutes before the scheduled time, Hope faithfully by his side. The dog, now fully recovered, seemed to sense the importance of the moment, staying alert and close to her protector. Precisely at noon, Robert Finch arrived, accompanied by Alex and two men who appeared to be bodyguards. The contrast between the two sides couldn't be more evident. On one side, Michael, a simple shopkeeper accompanied by a stray dog. On the other, Finch, the powerful businessman surrounded by his team. "Mr. Thompson," Finch began, his voice loaded with false cordiality, "thank you for coming. I think it's time we put an end to this unpleasant situation." Michael stood firm, his eyes meeting Finch's without wavering. "I completely agree, Mr. Finch. It's time to resolve this." Finch smiled, a gesture that didn't reach his eyes. "Excellent. I have here a proposal that I believe is more than generous. We're willing to buy your grocery store for a value well above market price. In exchange, you give up this absurd campaign and convince your followers to do the same." The silence that followed was deafening. The crowd, which until then had been murmuring quietly, fell silent, all eyes fixed on Michael. Michael looked at Hope, then at the crowd surrounding them. He saw familiar faces: Mrs. Harrison, Mr. Oliver, families who had been part of the community for generations. He saw hope, fear, and expectation in their eyes. Finally, Michael turned to Finch, his voice calm but laden with emotion. "Mr. Finch, I appreciate your offer, but I'm afraid you haven't understood what's really at stake here. This isn't about money. It's about community, about taking care of each other and those who can't defend themselves." Michael paused, stroking Hope's head before continuing. "This neighborhood, these people, these animals, they aren't obstacles to progress. They are progress. The true wealth of a city isn't in its skyscrapers or luxury condominiums, but in the strength and heart of its community." A murmur of approval ran through the crowd. Finch, visibly irritated, tried to interrupt, but Michael raised his hand, asking for silence. "I have a counter-proposal, Mr. Finch. Instead of destroying our community, why not work with us to improve it? Imagine the good your investment could do if it were directed towards revitalizing the neighborhood, preserving its history and its people." Michael's suggestion caught Finch by surprise. The businessman looked around, noticing for the first time the diversity and cultural richness of the neighborhood he planned to demolish. At that moment, to everyone's surprise, Alex stepped forward. "Mr. Finch, if I may," he began, his voice trembling slightly, "I think we should seriously consider Mr. Thompson's proposal. The numbers I've compiled show that a revitalization project could be even more profitable in the long run, not to mention generating a positive image for the company." The silence that followed was tense. Finch looked from Alex to Michael, his face a mask of internal conflict. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, he spoke. "Mr. Thompson, you are a formidable adversary. I never imagined that a simple shopkeeper and a stray dog could cause so much impact." Finch paused, seeming to carefully weigh his next words. Perhaps I was hasty in my approach. I'm willing to discuss alternatives that could benefit everyone." A collective sigh of relief ran through the crowd. Michael extended his hand, which Finch, after a moment of hesitation, shook firmly. "That's all we ask, Mr. Finch. A chance to show that progress and preservation can go hand in hand." As the crowd erupted in applause and celebration, Michael crouched down to hug Hope. "We did it, girl," he whispered. "We did it." As the afternoon sun bathed the park, a new era seemed to be dawning for Lincoln Park. What had begun as a simple act of kindness towards a stray animal had transformed into a movement capable of changing the fate of an entire community. But as Michael observed the scene of celebration around him, he knew that this wasn't the end of the journey, but just the beginning of a new chapter. The challenges that would come would be different, perhaps even more complex, but now they would face them together as a united community. And at the center of it all, a simple man and a dog with a leaf in her mouth, living symbols of the power of compassion and the strength of community unity. In the days that followed, Lincoln Park buzzed with renewed energy. The news of the agreement between Michael and Finch spread quickly, igniting a wave of optimism throughout the neighborhood. The animal shelter project, once a point of contention, now became a symbol of cooperation and progress. Michael's grocery store remained the heart of the movement, but its role was evolving. With the help of Finch's resources and connections, plans were underway to transform it into a community center, offering not just groceries but also educational programs, job training, and of course, support for animal welfare initiatives. Sarah took the lead in coordinating the shelter's development, working closely with veterinarians and animal behaviorists to ensure it would be a state-of-the-art facility. Emily, inspired by her experience, started a youth volunteer program, engaging local schools and colleges in the cause. Finch, true to his word, brought his business acumen to the project. He worked with local business owners to develop a plan that would revitalize the neighborhood while preserving its unique character. The Lincoln Park Renaissance, as it came to be known, was becoming a model for urban development across the country. One sunny afternoon, about a month after the confrontation in the park, Michael stood outside his store watching the bustling street. Hope sat beside him, her leaf long gone, but her legacy firmly established. "Mr. Thompson," a voice called. It was Alex, Finch's former assistant, now working full-time on the community development project. "We've just received the final approval for the shelter's blueprints. Construction can begin next week." Michael smiled, patting Hope's head. "That's wonderful news, Alex, and please call me Michael." As Alex excitedly shared the details, Michael reflected on the incredible journey that had brought them to this point. From a simple act of kindness to a stray dog, to a movement that had transformed an entire neighborhood, it was almost too much to believe. "You know, Alex," Michael said, his voice filled with emotion, "none of this would have been possible without Hope. She showed us that even the smallest gesture of compassion can spark incredible change." Alex nodded, looking at the golden dog with admiration. "She's quite something, isn't she? Who would have thought a dog with a leaf could change so many lives?" As they stood there, more and more people began to gather around. Mrs. Harrison, Mr. Oliver, Jack, Sarah, Emily, faces that had become family over the past months. They all had a story to share, a way in which their lives had been touched by the leaf dog revolution, as it had come to be known. The impromptu gathering turned into a celebration, with people sharing food, stories, and laughter. As the sun began to set, casting a warm glow over Lincoln Park, Michael found himself overwhelmed with gratitude. He looked at Hope, who was contentedly accepting pets and treats from her many admirers. "Well, girl," he said softly, "looks like we've found our forever home, haven't we?" Hope looked up at him, her brown eyes filled with what Michael could only describe as understanding and joy. She gave a soft bark, as if in agreement. As the evening wore on and the celebration continued, Michael knew that while this chapter of their story might be coming to a close, the true impact of Hope's legacy was only beginning. The leaf may have been long gone, but the seeds of compassion, community, and change it had planted would continue to grow and flourish for years to come. In Lincoln Park and beyond, the simple story of a man, a dog, and a leaf had become a powerful reminder that even in the face of seemingly insurmountable odds, a little hope and a lot of heart could truly change the world.